The night was cold and quiet. Every light in the palace had been put out, and the long stone hallways were dark except for the soft silver glow of the moon pressing through the tall windows. Mara moved through the shadows like she had been doing it her whole life. She pressed her back against the cold wall, listened for the sound of footsteps, and then kept moving. She carried nothing. No bag, no coat, no money. She had not planned this night for very long, but she had planned it well enough. She knew which guard took a long break at midnight. She knew which door in the east wing had a broken latch. She had noticed these things quietly, over many months, the way a woman notices things when she has no one to talk to and too much time to think. Her name was Mara Voss. She was 22 years old. 3 years earlier, she had been brought to the Ashvale Palace as the chosen mate of the Alpha King, a man named Darian Ashvale. He was powerful, respected, and feared by every pack on the continent. He was also someone who had never once asked her how she was doing. She had tried, in the beginning, to make something real out of the arrangement. She had sat beside him at long dinners and tried to learn the names of the people around the table. She had walked the palace gardens alone each morning and told herself that she simply needed more time, but time had not helped. What she had found instead, on a quiet afternoon in his private study, had broken something inside her that could not be repaired. She had not been looking for anything when she went into that room. She had only been looking for a book. But on his desk, spread out beneath a glass paperweight, was a document with her name at the top. It was a medical report, written in formal language, and it described her the way a farmer might describe a field. Good soil, rare genetic line, high probability of producing dominant offspring. Below it was a contract with 3 other pack lords, signed and dated, exchanging territory rights for a share in the bloodline she would produce. She stood in that room for a very long time. Then she folded everything up neatly, put it back exactly where she had found it, and walked out. She did not cry. She did not say anything to anyone. She simply started watching, and waiting, and planning. Now she was at the door with the broken latch. She pressed it open without a sound, stepped outside into the cold night air, and ran. She ran through the trees at the edge of the palace grounds, through a shallow stream that soaked her shoes, and across a wide open field that felt like it went on forever. She did not stop until the palace lights were so far behind her that she could no longer see them between the trees. Then she sat down on a mossy stone and breathed. She had no idea what she was going to do, but she was free. That was the only thing that mattered to her right then. She traveled for several days, sleeping in barns and eating whatever she could find or buy from small market stalls with the few coins she had taken from a bowl near the servants' entrance on her way out. She did not stay in any one place for long. She kept moving north, away from any territory that she knew Darian controlled, until she reached a small mountain town called Greyvale. Greyvale was the kind of place that did not ask questions. The people there were quiet and kept to themselves, and they were mostly used to strangers passing through. Mara rented a small room above a dry goods store and started looking for work. She found it at an herb shop. She had grown up learning the names of plants from her grandmother, and it turned out that knowledge was useful. The old woman who ran the shop, a thin woman named Bet, took her on without ceremony. Mara dried herbs, mixed remedies, and learned the regular customers by their ailments before she learned their names. 4 months after she arrived in Greyvale, she found out she was pregnant. She sat with that news for a long time before she let herself feel anything about it. When she finally did let herself feel it, what she felt was not fear, though fear came too. What she felt first was something quieter and more serious, a kind of settling, a decision being made inside her before her mind had time to catch up with it. She was going to keep the baby. She was going to raise it here, in this small town, far from palaces and politics and men who measured people by their bloodlines. She was going to build a life that was actually hers. What she did not know yet was that there were 2 babies. She found that out much later, on the night she gave birth, in a small, warm room above the dry goods store, with old Betty at her side, and a midwife named Sarah, who had traveled down from the next village over. The birth was hard. It lasted most of the night, but when it was over, Mara was holding 2 small boys, one in each arm, and Bet was standing at the window with her hand pressed over her mouth. "What is it?" Mara asked her. Bet nodded toward the window. Outside in the dark street, 3 large wolves were sitting perfectly still in a row, all facing the building. They had not been there an hour ago. They were not making a sound. "They've been coming closer all evening," Sarah said quietly. "Every animal within half a mile has been doing it." Mara looked down at her sons. One had dark hair and was already asleep, his tiny face calm and serious. The other had lighter hair and was watching the room with eyes that seemed too alert for a newborn. Neither of them had made a sound since they took their first breath, which was the opposite of what babies usually did. She named them Calum and Rowan. The years that followed were the best of Mara's life and the hardest. She raised the twins in near-complete secrecy. She taught them from the time they could understand words that they must never shift in public. She told them their father was gone, which was true in the way that mattered. She taught them about plants and weather and how to read people by the way they stood, lessons her grandmother had taught her, and that she now passed on. But there were things she could not teach them, because they arrived on their own. By the time Calum and Rowan were 4 years old, animals followed them home from the forest. Not in a frightening way, in a devoted way. A family of foxes took up residence beneath the porch. Birds landed on the windowsill during breakfast and waited to be noticed. Large wolves from the surrounding hills appeared at the edge of the yard on winter nights and lay down in the snow, patient and still, as though guarding the house. By the time the boys were 5, the other wolf-blooded people in Greyvale had begun to notice. No one said anything directly, but Mara saw the way they watched her sons at the market, the careful respect in their eyes, the way they stepped back slightly when Calum walked past, as if something in their bones was reacting before their minds could stop it. She knew what it meant. The Lunavale gene, which had been quiet in her own blood, had not stayed quiet in her sons. It had activated fully in both of them. She did not know how. She did not know what it would mean for their lives. She only knew that she needed to keep them safe, and that safety meant staying hidden. She did well at that, for 5 years. Then Sela found her. Sela had been the closest thing Mara had to a friend inside the palace, years ago. She was an enforcer, practical and direct, and she had never been cruel to Mara, even when the court around her had been unkind. Seeing her standing near the apple stalls in the Greyvale market on an ordinary Tuesday morning was one of the more frightening things Mara had experienced in recent years. Sela did not reach for her. She only looked at the boys, standing close to Mara's side, and her face went very still. "I'm not here to bring you back," Sela said. "I'm here because you need to know what's happening." What was happening was this. 3 pack lords had broken the territorial agreement that had kept the continent stable for a generation. There had been raids along the northern borders. There had been an attempt on Darian's life, which he had survived, but which had left the other packs sensing weakness. 2 smaller packs had already pledged their fighters to Halvin Drest, a lord from the eastern hills who had been looking for an excuse to expand for years. "The seers have been consistent," Sela said. "They say the only thing that can stop what's coming is the Lunavale line." "Then the seers can go find someone else," Mara said. She took her sons home and made dinner, and did not speak about it again that evening. After the boys went to bed, she sat by the fire and told herself it was not her problem. She had left. She had built a life. Whatever happened in that world was not her responsibility. Then Calum woke, screaming in the middle of the night. He was sitting up in his bed, his hands pressed against his temples, his eyes wide and full of something that looked less like fear and more like grief. Mara was beside him in seconds. He grabbed her arms and held on. "I could feel them," he whispered. "The ones who died tonight. They were calling out and nobody came." He meant the wolves killed in the latest border raid. Mara understood that without being told. She pulled him close and held him while he shook. After a while, when his breathing slowed, Rowan spoke from the other bed. He had been awake the whole time, sitting quietly in the dark. "We have to go," Rowan said. Mara did not answer him right away. "We have to go," he said again, with the calm certainty of someone much older than 5. She left 3 days later. She packed only what was necessary, said goodbye to Bet with a long hug that neither of them tried to explain, and walked out of Greyvale at dawn with her sons beside her. She arrived at the Ashvale Palace on a gray morning with low clouds and cold air. The guards at the front gate had been told not to stop her. Sela had arranged that much. Mara walked through the iron gates, with Calum on her left and Rowan on her right, and she looked straight ahead. She heard it happen before she saw it. a sound like a wave. Every wolf in the palace grounds, the ones in human form and the ones who had shifted, went still at the same moment. Then, one by one, they lowered themselves to the ground. Guards who had been standing at attention, enforcers who had been crossing the courtyard, senior pack members who had not bent the knee to anyone in years, all of them, without instruction, without choice, kneeling. The boys did not seem to notice. They were looking around at the palace walls with the curiosity of children seeing a new place. Mara looked up at the grand staircase and saw Darian standing there. He was exactly as she remembered him. Tall, controlled, always holding himself slightly apart from everything around him. But right now his face was doing something it had probably not done in a long time. It was showing exactly what he felt. He looked at his sons for a long moment. Then he looked at Mara. She met his eyes and said nothing. Isia. She did not need to. She walked past him into the palace, and her sons walked beside her, and the wolves of the Ashvale court remained kneeling until they were inside. The peace summit that had been falling apart for 3 weeks resolved itself inside of an afternoon. When Halvin Drest stood in the great hall and called Darian a fraud in front of all the delegates, when the shouting started and hands moved toward weapons, Calum walked into the center of the room. He spoke quietly. 3 words. Nobody could agree afterward on what the words were. But every person in that room felt the same thing at the same moment. A stillness, deep and complete, like the moment before sleep, and then a sense of connection running between them, like a thread, tying them together whether they wanted it or not. Rowan came to stand beside his brother, and the thread became a rope. The delegates sat down. The weapons were put away. Halvin Drest sat back in his chair with the expression of a man who had just realized he was in the presence of something he did not have a category for. The accord was rewritten that evening. The war did not come. Mara stayed in the palace on her own terms. She had written them out herself on plain paper and handed them to Darian without ceremony. Her own rooms, her own authority over her children. No titles she had not chosen. He signed every line. She was standing at a window on the morning of her 3rd day back when she heard him come into the room behind her. She did not turn around. In the courtyard below, Calum and Rowan were running between 2 elderly pack members who had apparently volunteered to chase them, both old men laughing in a way that suggested they had not laughed like that in some time. Darian stood beside her. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. She did not leave. Outside, her sons played in the pale morning light, and every wolf for miles around turned its head in their direction, sensing something it had no words for, something that had been missing from the world, and had finally, after a long time, come home.